Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's breakfast briefing. Bore da bawb, croeso mawr I chi gyd, braf iawn cael eich cwmni chi eto bore yma. My name is John Parry-Jones, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to this morning's breakfast briefing. This is the final briefing, our final briefing of this academic year, and we're going out with a bang this morning. This session is sort of following the trend that we set 2 or 3 years ago at the start of the pandemic, when we changed the format of our breakfast briefings to a conversation. The July breakfast briefing became a conversation or discussion with some business leaders. We interviewed James Timpson, you may recall, 3 years ago. 2 years ago, we had Julianne Haynes with us, and last year, Sarah John joined us. So this morning, this briefing has attracted a huge amount of attention. We're delighted to welcome Richard Hutton from Greggs. Richard, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We've had a huge amount of interest this morning. We've had over 175 registrations. People have still been coming through within the last hour registering for this morning's session. So we're delighted to welcome you this morning. Looking forward to hearing more about you and about Greggs. Very much looking forward to it this morning. I'm shortly going to hand over to Dr. Deborah Han, who is going to facilitate the rest of the morning, the Q&A session that will follow Richard's presentation. Thanks, Debs, again for carrying out the duties of the interviewer this morning. Now, before I hand over to Debs, as I always do at this point of the morning, I'd just like to give you some advance notice of some of the events that we've got coming up before long. I also need to remind you that we have speech-to-text captioning available this morning. If you want to take advantage of the captioning service that we have available, please click on the link that Angharad will have posted in the chat box this morning. You'll need to open the second window side by side with the first one. You'll be able to follow the discussion this morning with the benefit of the captioning service. Thanks to Julie for doing that for us. As I mentioned, we are taking a quick summer break. We'll be back in September. If you do have any ideas, any thoughts about breakfast briefings that you think may be of interest to us, we do have quite a few set up during the course of the autumn, but we'll soon be looking for briefings, for ideas to set up for the new year, for 2024. So if you have any ideas of briefings that may be of interest to our business community, do let me know. Get in touch with me or one of the team, and we'd love to speak with you just to discuss your ideas with you. The events that we have coming up in the autumn that we already have dates penciled in for, really great opportunity in September to meet with what you might call an expert in his field. Nicholas Jordan is the head of circular economy for KPMG. Huge amount of experience in business transformation and change management. It's a real opportunity to meet with such an expert. His fields of expertise are in managing improvements in a different number of fields, all sorts of sectors, whether it's IT, procurement, finance, marketing, you name it. He specializes in those fields. It's a really great opportunity, very rare opportunity for us to be able to have a conversation with him. He's based out in Switzerland, so that's going to be an online session again. But as I say, a rare opportunity. Keep an eye out for that date and the further details that we'll send out to you. And then in October the 19th, we have a session with Professor Joe Omani, demystifying AI. And if anybody needs to be demystified, it's probably me when it comes to AI. Joe has promised that this will be a jargon-free exploration of what AI can do for your business, how it can help your productivity and performance. And it's an opportunity to get in there first. Don't be left behind. We see a lot, we hear a lot about artificial intelligence. It's an opportunity to learn how it can benefit you and support your growth and success in the future. Great opportunity to learn more about it from Joe. And keep an eye out for Sarah's service design course. That's the second one. The first one was so popular earlier this year that we're needing to run another one. So if you missed out earlier in the year, do keep an eye out. The details will come through in the autumn, and take advantage of that and sign up if you can. The previous slide referenced our Help to Grow program. Just if you don't know, the Help to Grow program is a government-led or driven program designed for our SMEs. It's a 12-module program which incorporates teaching from our academics here in the school. Some of it is online, some of it is face-to-face. But it's a really, it's a program for which we get huge amount of positive feedback. Everybody enjoys the course when they go on it. There are opportunities to work with peer groups, to work with mentors, and as I say, the feedback on that program is always very positive. So if you do want to know more, either get in touch with me. Linda may be on this call this morning, so perhaps try and get hold of Linda if she's online this morning. But if not, come through one of us, and we'd be delighted to connect you. Finally, just a reminder that this morning's event is being recorded. If you have any questions, then please do pop them into the chat box, so that we can put them to Richard. This is an opportunity, as much as anything, for you to make to ask your questions, things that you may want to know about Greggs. Don't hold back. Pop questions in as early as you can, so that we can put those questions to Richard. On that note, I'm going to hand over to Deborah. Deborah's going to convene the next 3/4 of an hour or so. Debs, it's over to you.
Thanks, John, and good morning, everybody. Greggs was founded by John Gregg in 1939, when he started delivering eggs and yeast on his push bike to families in Newcastle upon Tyne. A decade later, John opened his first shop. Greggs, with more than 1,600 shops, are now a feature of almost every high street in the UK. Whilst we've all heard the headlines about Greggs vegan sausage rolls, what is perhaps less well known about Greggs is the social values at their core. This commitment to do good is not a new thing, with Greggs introducing free pies and peas supper for older restaurants in the North East in the 1960s. Through the establishment of the Greggs Foundation, Greggs have put values front and centre. Without wanting to spoil what Richard has to say this morning, they provide free breakfasts to primary school children, operate holiday programmes which provide food for children out of term time, and hardship funds for families in need. They also support the Children's Cancer Run, which has raised over 30 million to fund research into improving recovery rates of children with cancer. On top of all that, they've been named one of the happiest places to work in the UK. So we thought we should probably find out what they're mixing in their sauce to make for such a successful company that values its employees and the community it lives in. This morning, Richard Hutton has agreed to talk to me about their special recipe behind Greggs' success. Richard is currently their Group Finance Director and has been with the company for over 20 years. In addition to his financial responsibilities, Richard champions Greggs' community initiatives and is a trustee of Greggs Foundation. He is also a Director of Business in the Community, which is the business network dedicated to building a fairer and greener world. So we've got lots to talk about in the next hour, and please do feel free to post questions in the chat function. But I'll let Richard take over from here. However, before we do that, we wanted to share 2 short videos. So, Angharad. Richard.
Great, thanks, Deborah. Well, Bore da, thanks for joining me today. It's lovely to be with you all, if only virtually. I've actually been in both Cardiff and Barry in the last month, watching my wife tear around triathlon courses, which is something she does, and I'm chief photographer. But it's been great being in the area. I've actually got Welsh heritage as well. One of my grandfathers was from Fishguard in Pembrokeshire, so I proudly tell people that I am at least a quarter Welsh. both the reason we showed you those videos is just to sort of tee up some of the stuff that we'll talk about, but I'm happy to talk about anything you want to ask fundamentally this morning. As was mentioned in the introduction, I've been with Greggs, actually it's 25 years. This is my 26th year with Greggs. So I think one of the questions I ask myself is, why have you stayed quite so long? Because that was never the plan really, but fundamentally, I've found that it's an organization that suits me, suits my character, and that I feel has given me the opportunity through my career to do a lot more than just feed my family and, achieve some personal success. It's been a very fulfilling place to work and somewhere that I think has genuinely sort of made a real difference to communities where we operate. And a very good example of that is in that video, the first one, that was the Greggs outlets. So this is an initiative that goes way back in history, actually. If you look at sort of back in the 1970s, when Greggs was starting to expand in the northeast of England, they found that they had surplus product at the end of the day. That's the nature of being a baker. And so they established what they called a second day shop, where they would send the product the following day and sell it half price in a community where perhaps people couldn't afford the full price product. And, second day bread is still very good. And we've revived that sort of tradition and seen it as a way of tackling food waste. And so we do actually have an outlet shop in Cardiff and one in Barry. And they are both channels for us to push surplus food from the end of the day and, as I say, sell it cheaply. It's also somewhere that charities can go and collect up product if they can use it. And because there is no food cost to running that shop, they're actually relatively profitable. So my team have worked out a formula that effectively shares the profit from those outlets with the local community. We give the money to the Greggs Foundation, who then try and find other organizations in the area who are trying to work on food poverty issues. And so by creating a bit of a network between our shop and the local community, we're trying to reinforce the opportunity for people to access better food. So it's one small example of an awful lot that goes on behind the scenes that you wouldn't necessarily know. So the fact we have 800 primary schools supported through Greggs Foundation, not all funded by Greggs, many of them supported by partner organizations that try and make sure that children don't start the day hungry, makes a big difference to educational outcomes in some of these areas as well. And those are the sort of things which I think have kept me engaged for quite so long, quite apart from the fact that it's gone to be a business which is a bit of a British icon these days. I mean, it's extraordinary. We're literally, this Friday on Channel 5, there's a documentary where and it's all about Greggs. It's a whole hour of Greggs, 8 p.m. Channel 5. If you're still interested at the end of this hour, there's a follow-up for you. So it's remarkable, clothes in Primark, and but I think the way the business has evolved, it's kept a degree of affection, I think, with the public, because we've never taken ourselves too seriously. We're serious about what we do, but we don't take ourselves seriously. And we know that sort of bakery is a little bit indulgent, a little bit naughty, and we sort of join in the joke and don't try to be too clever. But I think people like that, and broadly, in various sort of challenges over the years, or in terms of creating opportunity, that's been very helpful to us. And these days, of course, you can find Greggs not just in traditional high streets, but in airports and in tube stations and drive-throughs and all sorts of places where traditionally you wouldn't have found us. So it's evolved from those sort of bakery roots in communities to being a genuinely sort of significant brand across the UK. Only in the UK at the moment, but who knows? We may go further in time. But it's been quite a journey, one I've thoroughly enjoyed being part of, and be very happy to explore any aspects of it with you.
Lovely.
Maybe I'll pause there, Deborah, and hand back to you.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. And I must admit, when we first started talking about this as an interview, I didn't know anything about the Greggs Foundation. And it's a fascinating side of Greggs as a business. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about what the Greggs Foundation is, why it was set up. I mean, because it's a really interesting part of the business that it feels strange that Greggs, who don't take themselves seriously, has this really serious side. So could you tell us a little bit about Greggs Foundation?
Yeah, well, it started in the 1980s because Ian Gregg, who built the business over the last couple of decades at that point, was, they'd always run things like the pie and pea suppers that you mentioned in the introduction, and just, tried to be helpful to communities where Gregg was operating. Ian used this phrase once when I was talking to him. He said fundamentally it's enlightened self-interest in a way, because if you look after the communities that your shops are in, then those communities are more likely to be sustainable. And if they're more sustainable, then your shop is more likely to be successful. So he, apart from being personally inclined to do that sort of thing, he could see that there was a business logic as well. Over time, he started to get overwhelmed with the number of requests he was getting. And I think the thing he found difficult was the number of hardship requests he was getting as well. It wasn't just people saying, we're having an event, could you provide some cakes? It was people saying, I've got this very difficult situation, could you possibly help? And that was really hard on a personal level to have people writing to you. So he created what at the time was called the Greggs Trust, which was a charitable foundation. And he gifted to it a significant proportion of his personal shareholding in the company to create a dividend income, which could then be spent. He also started an annual donation from the company to the charity. And I think he saw it initially as a way of just dealing with that issue and putting a little bit of a barrier between him and the demands that were coming in, and then over time employed somebody who could professionally deal with all that. And it's evolved from that point, really. Initially, it did focus very much on directly sort of impacting people in hardship. There was a big breakthrough back in the late 90s when through business in the community, one of our chief executives went on what they call a seeing is believing trip, where he was taken out to look at issues in education. And he went to a primary school in the West End of Newcastle where the head teacher was having to effectively pass the hat around local businesses to try and fund a breakfast for kids that weren't getting fed. And this was quite shocking. And fundamentally, we now know that this is an issue everywhere. But, I think at the time it was a very effective example of actually how taking people out of their comfort zones can create some change. So Mike Darrington, who at the time was the chief executive, came back to the office. He pulled myself and his personal assistant Lynn into his office and said, look, I've seen this breakfast club. I think it makes an amazing difference to these kids. We should look at it. And there's a whole story that goes on then over 20 years where we've gone from funding that one school to managing to support breakfast in 800 primary schools across the country. And anyone who's had kids knows that when they get hungry, their behavior deteriorates. Imagine trying to put that child into a classroom. They don't just not learn themselves, they disrupt the whole classroom. Yeah. And so it's a very simple thing, but a fundamental thing, that they should have the same opportunity as everybody else. And so making sure that they at least start with something in the stomachs is massive. And it sort of makes complete sense, I think, for Greggs to support the foundation on issues of food poverty when we're in the food industry and we have access to channels and support. I think one of the things when you're in an organization and if you are inclined to want to support the communities where you operate, is thinking, well, how should I do it? And I think you have to look to yourself and say, well, what are we good at? What are we good at that's different to others? And for us, it's about food supply chains. And I think that's why it's been a natural sort of place for us to go. I think that's why that outlet model works so well as well, because it works with our business. And so it's something that we can do, and we can do it well. So, yeah, the foundation has now got to a point where it gives about £4 million a year, which it sources from a combination of donations from Greg's, donations from other funders, partners who support the breakfast clubs, and also an income from an investment portfolio, which comes from those shares which he and Greg generously gave back in the 1980s. And it's something, as you say, I've been a trustee of myself and take a great deal of satisfaction from being involved with.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, one thing that strikes me, and reflecting back on the interview, so I did this interview 3 years ago with James Timpson. One thing that strikes me, it seems that at the heart of a lot of these companies are kind of almost family-based values. Does Greg's feel a little bit like a family when you work there? Because the other thing that kind of would link in with that, I guess, is pulling strands together, the idea that you have just been voted one of the best places to work in the UK. So does it feel like a family kind of ethos within Greg's?
I mean, that's at the root of it, isn't it? I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Timpson's, because we have a very strong relationship with Timpson's, actually. I think we do feel we share some values and sort of teach each other things. So they've taught us how to employ from prisons, for example, how to help ex-offenders back into work. They've developed models for that, and certainly Roisin, our chief executive, is very close to James and has learned a lot from him, which she's been able to apply. But yes, I think it comes back to just that basic value of treating people as you would want to be treated at the heart of it. It's nothing much cleverer than that, really. But sometimes that doesn't always happen in workplaces, and strange behaviors creep in, and people kind of get ideas that you need to behave in a certain way to get on, and then it starts to go a bit wrong. And I think that's fundamentally what you have to guard against. If you're doing something that seems sort of odd and not natural to you, well, why are you doing that? And has somebody sort of told you that's the right thing to do? So we try to, I think, encourage people to be themselves. It's interesting, the leadership courses that we run in the business, one of the big themes of them is authenticity. And for me personally, this was a big breakthrough in my career. So I remember when I was coming through the ranks, as it were. My predecessor was a guy called Malcolm Simpson, who was the finance director of Greg's for 33 years. He was one of these figureheads who was just like everyone feared Malcolm, but loved him at the same time. And he was a really strong character. And I was sort of quite intimidated by the idea of how I would possibly ever fill his shoes. And how could I be like Malcolm? Because I just couldn't. It just wasn't me. And I was very fortunate that just sort of in the couple of years before I had the opportunity to succeed into this role, Mike Darrington said to me, look, he said, I don't expect you to be Malcolm. I expect you to do things your way, and I want you to do them your way. And that idea of being your authentic self we've built that into our leadership development programs, because it's so liberating. Honestly, it took a weight off my shoulders when he said that to me. The idea that there wasn't some sort of corporate ideal that I had to live up to, that they wanted me to use my skills to lead in my way. And we've tried to sort of perpetuate that through our own sort of leadership development. I think it's super important. And I think, really interestingly, in this age where we're so sort of focused on developing greater diversity and inclusion in workplaces, that is massively important in that respect. If you create ideas of what people have to be leaders, you will discourage people from taking that step. So I think, but it does come back to, I think trying to keep a friendly, pleasant workplace where people enjoy what they do. Again, Mike Darrington used to he had this funny thing where he loved to sit in front of shareholders in the city and say, I'm pleased to tell you that you're our third most important stakeholder. And he just paused then and watched their faces drop a little bit.
Yeah.
Basically, he said, because my most important stakeholder is my employees. He said, if they enjoy what they're doing and genuinely take pleasure from their job, they will give great service in our shops. And if they do that, our customers will be really happy and they'll come more often. He said, and if they come more often, you will also be happy. And that logic, I think, is hard to argue with fundamentally.
That's really great. And I love the idea of kind of the authentic self and the authentic leader. I think that's so important. I'm going to move to some of the questions that are popping in the chat that I'm trying to manage as well. Wrapping two together. So there was an earlier question around retention and satisfaction that came from the NHS. And is there any advice there? But linked to that, there was a really interesting question around kind of protecting and ensuring the mental health and well-being of all the people involved with the business, not just the staff and the customers. So I guess there's a broader question around, how do you keep people happy and mentally healthy, linked to your firm? Do you have any thoughts around that?
I can see. I mean, we're all struggling with retention, aren't we? I mean, don't assume that just because I'm portraying this idea of a lovely, happy workplace that retention isn't still an issue for us. It is, and I completely understand that if you're in the NHS, that is, an extreme challenge. So, how do you? It's difficult, isn't it? I think it's such a cultural thing. I think fundamentally you can't make people stay. Sometimes they have. I mean, we have better than average retention, but we still lose people because sometimes people do a job because it suits their stage of life. But I think the one thing that we've really looked hard at is trying to understand the reasons people leave. And it's interesting when you do exit interviews. When we do exit interviews. It tends not to be about pay. The top two reasons people give for leaving the job are either I didn't get on with the manager or my colleagues, and this might be here in the office, it might be in a small shop where it's such a close-knit community that actually if that dynamic doesn't work between you and your boss or you and your colleagues, well, it's just, it's not good. It's not going to be a nice place to work, is it? So it's either that or it's the hours didn't suit me. So it just didn't work with my lifestyle. So we've had to respond to that and be much more flexible in terms of shifts and hours, and really look at how we can structure shifts that suit people. Good example. Recently, we one of the areas we think Grace can extend its business is by trading later. So as bakers, we tended to sort of shut up shop about 5 o'clock, sometimes earlier. And of course, that's no good if you're commuting home and want food on the go. So we've been extending trading hours, and rather naively, we just thought, oh, well, we'll just ask the staff who wants to work a few more hours. The answer was virtually nobody wanted to work a few more hours because it didn't suit your lifestyle. If your shift finished at 3 or 4, and actually you maybe had childcare responsibilities or something, you had to be home. So you weren't going to do an extra 2 hours. And so we've had to completely rethink that and recruit a different crew who come in for the tail end of the day, which might be students who love being able to come straight out of college and go and do a couple of hours. So I think being much more flexible about shifts and working patterns has been really important to make sure that the work can fit with the rest of your life. The issue over teams and the relationships between people, I think, is something that we work hard on anyway. But you do have to be looking for the problems and trying to help them surface. I think that's become easier with the more open society. So, as a simple example of that, Glassdoor. If you've got a shop that's got a problem in it, it's probably going to start becoming quite visible, and that's helpful. But we also have an employee opinion survey that we run every year, where as long as there are more than 6 people in a team, you can attribute anonymized feedback to that group. So every shop in the country, if there's a real problem with, say, a manager who's just not creating the right sort of environment in their shop, that should come out through the feedback that we get through the employee opinion survey. So there are things that we do to try and listen. certainly in our supply sites, we hold listening sessions all the way through to main board level. Some of our non-exec directors will literally go and sit and listen to people in our distribution centres and bakery sites and take on board their feedback, and it comes right back to main board meetings. So I think there are a few things you can do, but you've got to be prepared to respond to them as well, But I think being more flexible and dealing with behavioral issues is super important. On mental health, I think just the wonderful thing is that people are so much more open now about mental health issues. The availability of I suppose treatments for mental health issues is improving massively as well, and the stigma around sort of owning up to having mental health challenges that you are dealing with has receded, not completely, but the more that leaders talk about their own mental health challenges, I think the easier it makes it for everybody else in the organization to do the same, and that's a very, very healthy thing.
Thanks. Sorry, managing questions. And okay, so shifting slightly, there was a really interesting question in the chat about the impact of Brexit. And I wonder if you had anything you could kind of say around the impact that Brexit has had, negative or positive, on the stores and the business more generally.
I'm struggling to think of a positive thing.
I think many of us are, to be honest with you. But
yeah. Open to suggestions, but I mean, it's driven food inflation. It has created friction, obviously, at the borders. We have shops in Northern Ireland. Supplying them from Scotland has been a real challenge. The most obvious thing, I think, is the supply of labour into the economy generally, and everybody is struggling with the reduced flow of people who it's constraining the economy, basically, at the end of the day. Now, the government's view on that is, well, wages will rise and productivity will increase, and that's the long-term answer. And it may be. We can't really tell, because we're kind of in the middle of it, aren't we, at the moment? We're being squeezed by the fact that there isn't enough supply of labour. We're being challenged to try and find more productive ways of working. And yet those things don't happen overnight. And particularly in a retail shop like ours, it's quite hard to produce a lot of automation. But there are ways, and we see increasingly in sort of the market that, and you'll experience this yourselves, that going into shops, you're asked to do a lot more of the work yourselves these days. You're expected to go up to a big screen and place your order and pay for it. And, it's a lot of places have become a bit like Argos of old, haven't they? It's an electronic sort of brochure that you're choosing your products from. And it's a bit tangential, but it's creating some really interesting questions for us, because, going back to my point earlier, if we think that part of the charm of the Greggs store is the kind of the service and the warmth of the people and all that sort of thing, if those people are being replaced by more and more screens and automation and make your own coffee rather than having somebody hand it to you, then how do you protect that warmth and those things which we think are differentiating? I think it is a challenge. We will not hit as hard as some of the brands. I think some of the London focused brands in particular had a very high EU migrant workforce, and it was an absolute disaster for them. We didn't have quite that exposure, but at the end of the day, it's still taken people out of the employment market. We therefore have to fight harder to recruit. We've talked about retention earlier, but recruitment as well. I mean, we're having to be much faster in our recruitment. We were finding that, a bit like in housing booms where you get gazumped by somebody stealing the house from under your nose, people were doing that in recruitment. You'd offer somebody a job, they were due to start in 2 weeks, and suddenly they find that they haven't waited 2 weeks, they've gone to work for somebody else in the meantime. So we've had to become pacier, faster, get them working more quickly once we've identified somebody and made them an offer. So it's interesting. I think if there is a positive thinking about that, then it obviously is driving up wage levels, and it's really forcing employers to think about, am I a good employer? Because you have to be a good employer to compete in that market. People have got genuine choice. So I think if there is a positive, it's that from an employee perspective, perhaps it is driving up employment standards and wages. Commercially, it's quite challenging, but then, I think if we genuinely believe this point about being a decent employer and looking after people, we should therefore see this as a competitive advantage at this time. And I think to some degree that's true.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, and it is a very bizarre silver lining to a very dark cloud, I think. Kind of linked to that, I guess the next step along from Brexit would be the cost of living crisis, and one of the questions that's come through on the chat, and I think is a really interesting one, especially given the context of what we've talked about earlier with kind of impoverished communities and supporting areas that maybe there is food poverty. So there's a question with current rising trends of food prices, what is Greg's pricing strategy? And from my perspective, I guess I'd add to that, and how do you balance it with this narrative around, a history of Greg's ensuring that the communities can feed themselves? So it's that balance between business decision and kind of values decision, I guess.
Yeah. Food inflation has been extraordinary. There is no escaping it. And that is a problem, because the less income you have, the more of it you spend on food. So this is inflation is disproportionately hitting those on lower incomes. I know within the business, when we had the last pay award, our pay awards have gone from sort of 10% in shop staff through to 4% for the higher earners, very deliberately, because you don't need 10% if you're a higher earner, but you do if you work in a shop. So it is a big issue. Our approach to pricing is market driven, and we try to. The way we see the market that we compete in is that there are two sort of camps, if I can put it that way. You've got supermarkets who have amazing buying power, can hold a huge range in their shops, and our approach there is to try and be as comparable as we can with them on price. So we need to be good value versus supermarkets, but to win on product quality then, because we make fresh in the shops. We literally make those sandwiches at the back of the shop, and we're baking all day long. And so, I think that is differentiating. And as long as the prices are comparable with supermarkets for a better product, we think that keeps us sort of differentiated. But of course, we're not the only people who make fresh in shops. There's a whole food to go industry who do the same thing. And against those operators, we do genuinely try to be cheaper in our prices for what's probably a comparable product, in the sense that it's freshly produced on site. So value has always been absolutely at the heart of the Greggs proposition. Whenever we're successful, it's because we have introduced something that's terrific value for money, fundamentally, and that feels like a worthwhile aim. I think people sometimes say, well, where's the growth coming from in the future? What's next? You've done it all now, haven't you? It's never done, because the food industry is always inventing new food. It's a very aspirational thing, food. We all want nicer things. And take coffee, for example. We always used to drink, Nescafe or whatever. And then Starbucks and Costa introduced really nice coffee. And we and not just us, other brands as well, we feel like we've sort of democratized espresso-based coffee by making it affordable, so that actually the people who used to save up for it as a treat can now have it as an everyday thing, because it's within the realms of affordability. That innovation carries on, so there will always be new product ideas and things coming along, and if we can do them in an affordable way, I think you improve people's lifestyles. Now, that doesn't get away from the fact that people are, genuinely having to look for ways to save money. So we've tried our best. I mean, we have a business efficiency program which looks to offset as much as we can each year of the cost inflation that we're facing. So we're constantly looking to re-engineer supply chains and work with suppliers to try and find ways of making savings without cheapening the product. Scale helps as well. So the fact that we have more than 2,000 stores means the supply chain behind that is a big, busy supply chain and very efficient. That helps as well to make for a better value offer. I guess that's it. I mean, the evidence over the last year or so is that actually, even though we've had to move our prices up, the value credentials of the business have never been higher, because of course it's all relative, isn't it? You know, I mean, as Starbucks coffee goes up in price, and Greggs goes up by less, then the gap widens. So we still, you know, despite having to charge more, we do seem to have the highest value ratings in the industry still. And we're constantly looking for new areas where you can make things more affordable for people, because that is at the heart of the business model. So I think that's the kind of the commercial side of it in terms of an answer. And then, of course, as much as we can through the foundation, we've tried to support people in genuine hardship, and you know, we've talked a bit about that already.
Yeah, and I guess that demand just increases as things get harder. Switching slightly, and quite a challenging question, I think, on the chat around kind of the obesity crisis in the NHS. And I'm going to read this one word for word, just because I think it's important I get it right. So this is Gimmo, who says, "I love what you're doing and I love your products, but think it's important to acknowledge that cheap fast food has an impact on the health of the population. He works, or she works, in the NHS, which is struggling to deal with the impact of obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, etc. How does Greggs square the circle of striving to be an ethical company, but also a contributor to this problem?" So how would you respond to that one?
Yeah, no, it's a massively important question, not just for Greggs, but for the country, isn't it? You know, we have there's undoubtedly an issue with obesity, and it's interesting, if you travel around the country, as I do, it is definitely connected to income and deprivation. I mean, put it simply, you know, if you travel between Newcastle or Barry and London, you'll see very different outcomes. So it's something we've all got to tackle. And if Greggs wants to be a sustainable business, which it absolutely does, we also have to play our part in that. So fundamentally, I think, you know, you start from a place of saying there's no doubt that some aspects of bakery foods are indulgent. You know, I mean, we sell lots of sandwiches and salads and all sorts of things which, you know, are very balanced in their nutritionals, but you know, you shouldn't have a sausage roll or a donut every day. And we also sell those. We would argue that when you do, you should come to Greggs, because if you knew the story behind how much effort we put into making sure that they're as good for you as they can be, whilst accepting that they are an indulgent product, then you would choose Greggs every time. A huge amount of effort goes into trying to improve the nutritionals of products over time. That's happened over decades. I can think there was a whole period where trans fats were taken out of pastry, for example. The amount of salt, fat, and sugar that's been reduced from products is enormous. I mean, public health bodies have set targets for the industry for sugar reduction, and we've always beaten those ahead of time in terms of that process. We stood in the development kitchens here in Newcastle about 2 months ago, and the product development team took us through all the work that they are doing with the existing range to take more salt out, more fat out, more sugar out. It has to be done carefully over time, because if you go too fast, you lose people along the way. I remember 20 odd years ago talking to somebody from Unilever about this very same thing with salt, and they were saying this has to be done carefully over time, because if you just lose people because you've changed the taste too much, they will go and find a saltier alternative, and they'll just end up sort of with a worse product. So actually trying to carry people on this agenda is really important. And I think actually, you know, certainly, I mean, Public Health England, we've had a very strong relationship with, and they know that by working with Greggs, they can probably have a bigger impact on the nation's health than by throwing rocks at us. And so they've worked with us to help us on this journey of improving the nutritional content of food. So we're constantly working on it. It is, I don't think it's about prohibition, it's about trying to make the product as good as it possibly can be first, and then encouraging genuine choice. Now, I think this is one of the challenges around poverty, is that have you genuinely got choice if you're on a reduced income? Can you afford better food? So we're one of the things we are prepared to do along the journey is to accept lower margins on healthier products if necessary, in order to give equality of choice in terms of price. And an example that's live out there at the moment is that we've deliberately discounted fruit pots if you buy them with a meal deal. But Greg, so if you go in for a breakfast or lunch meal deal, you can have a fruit pot for £1. They're usually £1.45. And to be honest, at £1, I barely make any money on it at all. But that's okay, because the reason we're doing that is if you've bought your sandwich and your drink and you're thinking, I quite like a little sweet treat at the end of my lunch, if the choice is between a cookie or a donut or a biscuit or something that's £1 or a fruit pot that's £1.45, you might just make that choice, even though you know the fruit pot's better for you. So we've deliberately taken our own margin out of the fruit pot to try and give that genuine choice. And we've actually costed into our plans the assumption that we will keep doing that as part of the sustainability journey. Now, obviously, we still have to be viable and make money as well, but we are genuine about the idea that people need to make informed choices, but actually have economic options rather than just, it's easy to say, we've given them choice, but actually if the choices are at different price points, that doesn't work. The other aspect, I think, which you have to be more careful with, is about education. So whose job is it then to educate people to make better choices in terms of what they eat? At the heart of it, I think public authorities have to take the biggest role with that, but we can also play a part there. So we've actually tried to build on the relationship we have with schools through the Breakfast Club program. So we offer them an educational program called Agents of Change as well. Now, Agents of Change isn't our thing. It's something that we have worked with another charity to bring in. They're head teachers who basically are passionate about sustainability and have created a fun, engaging program for primary school kids to think about the way that the little changes they can make to their lives to make for a more sustainable future. And interestingly, a lot of the stuff that they might do to try and make choices about what they eat is actually also better for them. So they take them through little case studies about the whole supply chain, about how much water and energy is consumed in making a bar of chocolate versus a banana. And lo and behold, at the end of the day, the smart choice is the banana. But it's interesting because the kids are sort of like taught to want to do it for the planet, not to necessarily because somebody's told it's good for you. So it's a different kind of, psychologically, it's a different approach, and they get super enthusiastic about this thing. So we've supported that. I think it's in about 250 of our Breakfast Club schools are doing that. Now, that's a really long-term approach to this. So the benefits of that might be still 10, 15 years away. And I don't know whether we'll ever be able to measure them, but it feels like, you've got to try some of these things. So this whole issue it's super important to us. We, as I say, we don't encourage you to have sausage roll every day, but we do think it's the best one on those days when you're treating yourself.
Yeah, sausage rolls are a big thing in our house. So yeah. There's so many questions coming through now, and we could keep going for another hour. So I think I'm going to have to be selective on the questions and kind of lay the groundwork for another conversation down the line. I think given what you were just talking about, I'm going to pick up a question in the chat around climate change and the fact that actually climate change is one of the biggest challenges that we all face, be it individual or organisation at the moment. So we've had the banana example. What is Greg's doing to kind of address climate change within its business model?
Yeah. This and biodiversity are the two massive challenges at the moment for the planet, aren't they? So we've signed up to science-based targets, which some of you will be more familiar with than others, but fundamentally it means that our targets for carbon reduction are aligned with the UN goals for avoiding climate or limiting climate warming. So we've signed up to an absolute reduction target or pathway, even though we're a growing business. So that makes it really hard. If you're opening, when we started engaging with this, my natural inclination was to say, well, look, if we're opening more shops, then surely the important thing is our carbon footprint per shop should be the thing that's reducing, because we're displacing others as we grow, and that's, if they're less carbon efficient, that's a good thing. Anyway, shareholders didn't buy that. They've put us under real pressure to say, no, even if you grow, I want your absolute carbon footprint to reduce to zero along this straight line fundamentally. And in the end, we looked really hard at what the practicalities of following that journey were and decided we could sign up to that. So we are already, this is the sort of the second year of that pathway. We are converting more and more of our gas usage to biogas at this stage. We have a big job to do in our refrigeration network, because some of the gases that are used in refrigeration are incredibly harmful. They're not carbon, but they are much more harmful than carbon. You have to be really, really careful about A, making sure that you don't lose them, and B, replacing them with much more benign gases, which is a whole process we're going through. Those two things will keep us probably aligned with the science-based targets pathway for the next 3 or 4 years. After that, the big thing is about vehicles on roads. So, and sorry, I should have said at the start, I'm talking here about scope 1 and 2 emissions. So the things that we directly control. I'll come back to scope 3 in a second. We've got to find alternatives for diesel trucks running up and down the roads, and that's quite challenging. But there are some interesting experiments out there. There's a whole piece of motorway sort of running out to Hull where they're going to electrify the inside lane, a bit like a train line. Overhead wire, truck can run along like a tram on power. So that's interesting. It therefore only needs a battery to get it on and off the motorway. So we will start to engage with those things as they become viable. We've got to, but we're going to need to do that before. I think within 5 years we'll need to start moving some of the fleet over to these technologies. So there are all sorts of interesting sort of things happening there that will help us to eliminate the carbon in our supply chain. I mean, our shops are already on sustainable electricity, and so it's there's a lot of that has been done. Scope 3 is the carbon in your supply chain, and this is where it gets really interesting, because that's 93% of it. So all this talk about trucks and gas and that sort of thing, we're talking about 7% of our ultimate footprint, because most of it is in the products that we sell and what they're made of. So beef, for example. The beef industry has got some big challenges. I personally have not quite stopped eating beef, but almost stopped eating beef after I saw the carbon footprint of beef versus other proteins. It's phenomenal. So I think, one of the things I think that will help in the food industry is when we start carbon labeling. So I think, alongside salt, fat, sugar, and all those other things, I think you'll soon be able to see CO2 equivalents for the product you're buying. And when you do, it will probably influence your behavior, I think. So I think that's something that will be coming, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think ultimately consumers have to play a part in that. Obviously, we work with our suppliers, and we expect them to go on the same journey we're going on, and that we need them to put pressure on their suppliers, and it needs to go all the way back down the food chain. But ultimately, whilst they might decarbonize their processing costs, the fundamental content of the food also may need to change over time. And I think you'll find that we all have to eat different things. But the food industry is brilliant over the years at evolving and overcoming these things and still producing really tasty, nice things to eat. And I think the faster you go on that, the more competitive advantage you may have long term. But it's super important.
Mm. like I say, there's so many questions I could ask now, but I think I'm going to go with two more. And there's one in the chat that I just think is a brilliant question. And Pip Thomas says, I'm fascinated by the rise of the coolness of Greggs as a brand. Flags at Glasto, clothes in Primark, etc. Was this an intentional move by Greggs, or was it a happy accident? I think something around the branding, and have you had a hand in these flags at Glasto? Or
no, we were as amazed as anyone else that see flags at Glasto. It's unbelievable. In fact, somebody sent me a picture the other day of a kind of like a beach where there was like a concrete sort of, I don't know what it was, even some concrete thing, and somebody had painted it as a Greggs sign. And like, well. So we don't go out vandalizing or that sort of thing. It's a happy accident, really. It's extraordinary. I mean, we have a lot of fun with the PR, and we've done all sorts of fun PR stunts over the years. And I think, again, it comes down to this idea of not taking yourself too seriously. So the idea that, we did deliberately launch a festival range at Primark. And we've done a Christmas range and that sort of thing, but why can you even do that? I mean, why would you? I mean, I don't know. I mean, you wouldn't go buy a Tesco one, would you? Sort of Tesco Christmas jumper. But I mean, literally, I saw one of the analysts who covers Greggs, sent me a picture of their priest preaching on Christmas Day in a Greggs Christmas jumper. It's extraordinary. So I think it comes down to this, again, this idea of trying not to be too corporate, try and have a bit of fun. And some brands do that well. I mean, I think Innocent Drinks and somebody was telling me Paddy Power are quite good at this sort of thing, that they just sort of just roll with it a bit. And, well, will it last? I hope so. But I think it will come down to behaviour and not getting too carried away with ourselves.
Yeah, it goes back to the sense of fun you've been talking about throughout the interview. So last question, I guess, is, and this is one that was one of the first questions was asked by Mel Evans, is what's your biggest learning journey? And she did ask your biggest learning journey with your time at Greggs. So I guess you can talk personally here. You've been with the company for 25 years. What's the one thing that you've learned that you kind of would like the audience to take away with them from today?
I'm not sure there's one big thing. There's so many things, aren't there? I mean, I think you should expect that work is hard work. You can't sort of, I mean, we're all busy all the time, aren't we? But every now and then, I think, for me, the lesson is try to get away from your email in your desk more than you naturally would do. I could spend all my time just answering my emails. I could spend all my time sort of, working on my laptop. And I find it really hard to push myself to not do that. But when I do, it is so enriching, and it makes a difference to my perspective on the business, and my ability to lead it and to give direction in it as well. Because I think fundamentally, people want some idea of direction from leaders, and it's super important that you just don't ferret yourself away and get consumed by all the things you could be doing. You have to kind of find a way of just escaping that and sitting back a bit and thinking about directionally, where are we going? Is everybody clear on that? Do I need to recommunicate it? I find trains a great place to do some of the thinking personally, but that doesn't help in terms of being amongst people. So yeah, sometimes it is just using a stupid reason to walk around the office and go and get something that you could make a call and have delivered to you. Go and get it. Just do those things that make yourself a little bit more visible, get you out there, and the conversations you'll have along the way are sometimes really, really interesting. I think it's one of the reasons I come back to the office actually is because you don't get any of that when you're sitting as we are on a Teams call or a Zoom call. So, I think just trying to get out there despite the weight of reasons not to.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. There's been so many, important things today about talking to human beings, getting out into the community, loads of brilliant stuff today. Couldn't get to all the questions. Sorry if we didn't. So I'm going to pass to John now, who's just going to wrap up the call. But thank you again.
I am. I'd just like to echo that as well, Deborah. Thank you so much, Richard. That's been you've been a wonderful person to interview this morning. The responses you've given have been so thorough and comprehensive and honest. And I hope you've appreciated, you've enjoyed being away from your laptop. You said you could spend your whole life doing your emails and sitting in front of your laptop. I hope you've enjoyed being a part of our community for this for the last hour this morning.
I genuinely have. Thank you.
We're really grateful, and we've learned so much about Greggs as well. There's so much more than meets the eye. So it's been a really wonderful morning. And can I also, on behalf of us all here at the school, say thank you to those of you who've joined us this morning. Really grateful for your support. And for those of you who've supported us throughout the past 12 months or 10 months since we've been running these back in September. We've had over 1,000 people register for these briefings during the course of the past year or so. So we're really grateful for your support. If you're not currently part of our community and you'd like to hear more about the briefings and the events that we run here in the business school, please do get in touch. We can ensure that you're sent the links to be able to join, or just stay on this call. We'll be on this call for another few minutes now, so if you just want to stay on the call and communicate with us, that would be fine. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi gyd am eich cefnogaeth trwy gydol y flwyddyn. I ni'n yn ddiolchgar iawn, gobeithio yn fawr fyddwn eich gweld chi eto yn y flwyddyn newydd. We hope to see you again in the autumn, and we look forward to seeing you then. And thank you again for joining, and I hope you have a great summer, and we will see you in September. Thank you, everyone.